Thank you for joining us. I'm Megan Doherty, Director of the Museum of the White Mountains. It's great to have you with us in person and online tonight. As we gather together today, we're all on Indigenous lands. Those of us at the Museum of the White Mountains are on Indakina, which is the ancestral and present homelands of the Abenaki and Wabanaki peoples. We're grateful for their stewardship of these lands and waterways. For those of you on Teams, we maybe know how to put links in the chat. We'll figure that out. We'll get them to you somehow, where you can learn more about the Indigenous histories of your place at native-land.ca, as well as the Abenaki peoples of Northern New England through the Musée des Abenaki in Quebec. Thank you for joining us for this final event tied to our summer exhibition, The White Mountains, A Crossroads. This is also the first event of our Mountain Voices series this year, which expands on topics we could only barely touch upon in the exhibition. If you haven't already seen the exhibition, it's on view until Saturday, the 13th, so you have 2 more days as of now, Thursday the 11th, to come by and see this exhibition. And I'm grateful to our speaker today, Clarissa Palmer, for her willingness to think with me about the history of human-animal relationships in the White Mountains as I was doing research for the exhibition. In addition, she helped arrange one of our summer field trip series, bringing us to farms and thinking about working animals throughout the region with 3 great field trips. And today's talk builds on research she did during her fall 2024 sabbatical. Her project moves beyond traditional human-centric narratives to embrace an animal-centric perspective, critically examining concepts of animal ethics, welfare, and consent in historical and contemporary context. Please join me in welcoming Clarissa. And it should be good. Great. But I'm right there if something goes right.
Great. Thank you. So, as was part of the introduction, I am a faculty member here at Plymouth State University in the psychology program. I'm also the curator of the Littleton Area Historical Museum up in Littleton, New Hampshire. I put my slides in a slightly different order than most because typically I get so excited about what I'm talking about, I forget to thank the people who make this all possible. And so thank you to the museum staff for supporting this presentation today, for engaging in those conversations to push this research further. Also to the curators, volunteers, and staff at the many institutions that I visited as part of my sabbatical and still collaborate with today. I want to thank you for being here today in person and on Teams. Be willing to go through this long winding journey with me that we're going to present tonight about working animals in the White Mountains. I also have some friends and family members who are in person and on Zoom who not only support but encourage some of my strange ideas about working animals, including bees and cows, as you'll see later on. And last, I wouldn't be doing this work if I didn't have a long history of working with animals myself. This is Walter and Hobbs, who are 2 steer that we work with now. These animals and many others that have been a part of my life really give me the opportunity to take a step back and reflect on what they're doing, why they're doing, and how they choose to engage with us and with our visitors to the farm. So thank you all. When you think of the White Mountains, what are some things that might come to mind for you? Yeah. Skiing, because you love the snow and you're looking forward to that. Anything else about the White Mountains? Hiking. So thank you. Some spring. Climbing the peaks. Climbing the peaks. Anything else about the White Mountains come to mind? Yeah. Deer. So some of the animals that might be more wild and indigenous to the region. Moose. Have you seen any lately? No. No. We were just watching a study on that the other day about the decline in moose population too. What about the phrase working animals? What might that bring up for you?
Horses.
So horses doing what, Gigi?
Well, bringing out the logs in the olden days when the sleds.
Great. Great. So some logging work, some heft, some horsepower there. Anything else with working animals?
Oxen.
So some ox, maybe doing similar things.
Pulling, yeah.
So strength-based workouts there. Yeah. And what about the term animal labor? Is that a phrase you're familiar with or have thought about? For many people, it's not a more common phrase. We think that and we know that there are animals that work, that perform certain tasks on our behalf, but we don't necessarily think about it as labor. We think of labor as something humans engage in and humans get paid for with a resulting task. We don't necessarily consider it with animal perspective. And so what I've really taken a handle on is this idea of animal labor and how we're asking animals to partner with us in different tasks and different ways. So we're going to use that phrase a lot today when we're talking about animal labor and how animals have really helped us enjoy the White Mountains. Now, you brought it up with logging, with pulling logs out of the woods to make roads, railroad tracks, hiking trails. All of those ideas help us with tourism. And so tonight we will look at how animals have shaped and continue to shape our life in the White Mountains. You might not have the best sight of this picture, but this is a 4-horse team that is pulling approximately 10,000 pounds with the sleigh included. So about 9,500 pounds of hay and then 500 pounds for the sleigh. And the 4 horses are pulling that, as you can see, in the winter time there. The White Mountains was established over 10,000 years ago. People were inhabiting this land called now the White Mountains. It started with Abenaki, indigenous people, and New Hampshire and the White Mountains were some of the last places in New England to be inhabited or settled, and that's due to the rough terrain. Very rocky. We're the Granite State for a reason. And so it took a lot of effort to actually clear land for roads, for tracks of being able to travel upon. As you mentioned, logging, agriculture, peak farming, those were some of the more critical, necessary activities that animals were engaged in alongside humans when first settling the White Mountain area. Oxen are usually worked in pairs of teams, and these teams are used after the logs are cut to pull out heavier weight. Oxen typically can pull a little bit more weight than draft horses. Draft horses were used for some of the more intricate aspects, and so once the ox and their teams had the rough land cleared, the teams of working horses, draft horses, would come in and be used to flatten that out and to make it a little bit more smooth for public transportation, for private transportation. The Industrial Revolution came in early 1700s to early 1800s. That brought in a lot of railroad traffic. It brought in a lot of tourists coming up to the area, which led to tourists needing places to live, visit, eat, and stay. And so the grand hotels like the Mount Washington, which was built in 1902, was very instrumental in having animals do some of that work that paved the foundation for the tourist industry in the White Mountain area. So what does and did the economy look like back in early 1750s and 60s up to now? So we talked a little bit about the ox and the draft horses. When you really talk about horsepower, that's where the term came from. How much can horses pull? How much can they travel with? How much support do they need to be able to pull a load of logs, a load of vegetables, what have you? The cows, mules, and horses were often worked to have a more delicate or more finesse to the area that was being rough cleared by the ox and the steer. This was a donkey from the Appalachian Mountain Club, and you can see they have some saddlebags that were used to bring up equipment for the hikers, the campers, but also equipment to help further clear and maintain the trails. Cows, of course, were utilized on farmland for dairy and also for meat, but also for their leather. Dogs and donkeys are sometimes not thought about as working animals, but as you can see here, this little guy had a purpose. He was pulling a friend in this sleigh. Now, there's a lot that this picture can tell us, and this picture can tell us that a dog was critical to transportation, maybe critical to recreation. Perhaps the dog was a necessary transportation tool because the other animals on the farm or in the town actually were working in different ways. And so this child and their family figured, we have a dog. The dog can pull some weight too. So let's put him on the sleigh and have him transport the child around. Donkeys are great guardians of flocks and herds. And so a lot of times, in addition to being pack animals with working on maintaining trails and maintaining camps, especially logging camps, and maintaining the supplies that are needed to secure the camp, donkeys were included as part of the farm life to keep bear, coyotes, wolves, etc., away from the farm animals and the livestock. We cannot forget cats. Cats are critically important. A lot of times we think of cats as either being standoffish or being lap cats. They seem to have one or two personalities. Sometimes they're even dog related and respond to their name and perform tricks for treats. Back in the 1700s and early 1800s, when people were building the railroad, they had what were called station houses and section houses. And each section of the train, the railroad, would stop and their workers would live at the section house while they were working on that particular part of the railroad. And so the section houses and station houses had cats that would help to keep rodents away. Rodents have been known to carry diseases that can be deadly to humans. So having cats around kept diseases at bay. Also, these section houses and station houses had stores of food. They had no refrigeration at the time. And so grains were relatively accessible to mice and small rodents. And eating the stores of food was not great for the people who were relying on those stores and relying on donkeys or burros to get additional foods up to the station or section house. So cats kept those vermin away. Little guys, but very important. Okay. Some of the types of work, as we talked about, logging camps. People would go away, mostly males, would go away for long periods of time and work on logging camps. They would work in isolation and in new areas. So there wasn't a lot of population around there. So animals were also companions if they were out, if people were out and they were working in these logging camps fairly isolated. Railroads, as we talked about, building railroads, as you'll see in a second, may not seem like a big deal now, but in the 1800s, it was hard, heavy work. Farm life, everything from clearing the land with ox and with steer to actually being able to use machinery to till over the land. And that was usually done by horses who had the ability to do a shorter turn than ox might have. Transportation. Not only did horses and ox transport products and goods, they also transported people. We saw the little boy with the sleigh, but horses also were used for carriages from the railroad to taverns to inns, also bringing products down to different states. This is a map from 1894 that looks at the railroads that were coming in and through New Hampshire. And again, keep in mind, 1894, this gives you a wide-scale look at where the railroads were and where they were coming in from Maine, from Massachusetts, and from Canada and into Vermont. This picture is a closer-up look. And to the upper left, you can see St. Johnsbury, which is Vermont, and Littleton is right there with Dalton and Lyman in Bath. And so that is a targeted look at the White Mountains and how railroads became part of our region, bringing residents to live for the summer, bringing patients to come in to the North Country and the White Mountains to deal with hay fever relief, to also help with getting fresh air. Families would come up for full summers at a time, not just a weekend here or there, because it took some effort to come across. The railroads that were on parcels of land that were cleared by ox and horse also brought in industry. So we were able to start to realize the idea of tourism in New Hampshire. But it didn't just bring people, it brought products. And the products that the railroads brought in had to get somewhere, from the railroad station to people's homes, hotels, inns, taverns. So 1894, no automobiles up in this area at that time. So horse-led carriages were the go-to to get materials and people from the railroad stops to their next destination. If you know me at all, you know I am a numbers person. So I went looking through some old annual town reports. And so the town of Littleton in 1840 had 381 horses, almost 1,800 cattle, and over 6,000 sheep. Okay. 1840. The products that were sold, and this is an important aspect, these are only the numbers of products that were sold, counted to be sold, not those used by individual farms or given away in barter or trade. So 105,000 pounds of butter in 1839 is when it would have been counted. So nearly 1,800 cattle produced enough butter to be sold for over 105,000 pounds and kept some for home. 1840, no refrigeration, no technology to freeze. 1940, 100 years later, 185 horses. Remember the number for the sheep? Over 6,000 sheep, down to 18. That's huge. That's a tremendous drop. Neat stock are also cattle that are intended to be sold. The picture here is the evolution of fire trucks. From 1840, 1872, when horses were being utilized to pull fire trucks, to 1919, when they started using trucks for that. Don't worry about the numbers. We'll get back to them in a minute. 2022, notice the data is now county data, not just town data. So this is Coos County, northern New Hampshire. This is a a draft horse team, a teamster from the North Haverhill, New Hampshire fair this past year. We're seeing the cattle numbers come up. We're seeing goats now added into the count, and we're still seeing sheep and lamb relatively low in the data count. I do also want to caution that these numbers are self-reported numbers. They are as accurate as the town and county can be. So there may be some inconsistency or irregularities, but they are self-reported and publicly accessible data. Gigi.
What's the difference between chickens and pullets?
Yeah, so pullets are considered under 1 year of age. And so they are the chicks in essence.
Thank you.
Thank you. I knew I did my research for a reason for some of these questions, because I did. I wanted to keep the clear delineation and distinction here because they are different. But I also wanted to know what that difference was myself. The pullets are chicks. Okay. So this gives us a better graphic to be able to compare the years across and maybe to help understand what's happening here. The towns in White Mountains are looking at about 1760 to 1774 founding. And so we're looking at about 60 years for 1840 that the towns have been incorporated or inhabited by the time this annual report came out. And so this annual report with the 6,170 sheep, that's real. That's how many sheep were counted in that year and published in the town report. Why were there so many sheep in 1840, but yet in 1940 there were only 18? 100 years later, some things that happened was the migration west. And so people were now farming in newer areas of the country that hadn't been farmed before. These areas that haven't been farmed before had soil that were more nutrient, more nutrition dense for the critters, specifically the sheep. The sheep had depleted the soil in the White Mountains, creating a not so great environment for the sheep to be raised in. So that's one reason why there was a decline of the sheep. The dairy industry, you can see, has gone up a little bit in 1940 to 2022. Dairy cattle were swapped out for the sheep. And so dairy cattle took the place of sheep. Sheep also were not so resistant to the weather in the White Mountains. It was a cold, hard winter for the sheep. And so they did not thrive here. So farmers were looking for other areas of the country to be able to relocate and have a successful flock of sheep. Another issue with the sheep produce wool. There were not a lot of imports in 1840 from other countries like the UK, Ireland, Scotland. Were not bringing over a lot of wool. So farmers here saw a need to be able to produce their own wool. And so the numbers went higher. When the tariffs and the barriers to bringing in wool from other countries went away, the need for sheep in this country went away as well. A lot of sheep imports, wool imports came from Australia and New Zealand starting around 1900. So we're starting to see that influx of other countries' wool was negatively impacting the sheep population in the White Mountains. So that change in how we are working with or using animals really started to take a reflective approach with the idea of the Industrial Revolution, because we're bringing in sources, products from outside of the White Mountains. We may not see the same value of animals to provide us with milk, with meat, with honey, with wool, with lanolin that we saw before. Now we have more options. We don't necessarily need to raise animals ourselves for these purposes. We can get them the services from outside. And that had a lot to do with the influx and improvement in technology. So railroads, bringing foods, bringing products in and out of the White Mountains, the development of refrigeration, again, making food safety and food preservation easier. Food lasted longer. It stayed fresh longer. So we had this reduced need and reliance on working animals because of these increases of technology. And perhaps because of these increases in technology and more of a reliance on machinery and equipment, people were able to take a step back and reflect on their relationships with their animals in a different way. Maybe now we're not looking at the strength and power of an animal to clear land or to move rocks for a stone wall, but maybe now we're starting to see animals as having emotion, having feelings, having reactions that are not just based on a stimulus and response, but they actually have a sense of being. And we're starting to think about their well-being. What does that look like? Especially if they're not working, what does their lifespan look like? What does their quality of life look like if they don't have an intended purpose or a purpose that they've had before? So as this started happening, as people started relying less on other animals for the work, they started looking at why we had these relationships of asking animals or telling animals that they needed to perform for us. And there were several theories that were related to the idea of animal ethics and are animals sentient? Do they have feeling? Do they have independent thought? And perhaps some of the most interesting early theories that are an indirect relationship to animals and how animals exist and how we work with or use animals come from the René Descartes idea. And René Descartes was a French philosopher who thought that animals don't possess feelings. They're not conscious. The mind and body are separate. So they're asked to do the work. Their bodies naturally do the work. Their brain is not connected to their body, and their brain cannot be thinking about morality or ethics or consequences. And so that's the Cartesian idea of how people might have looked at animals. They are tools. They are mindless tools that can be directed to do our work based on our interactions with them. Some more direct ideas are that animals have feelings. Animals have thought. They have concern for others. This is a picture of the Mount Washington Hotel with a flock of sheep in front who are doing the work of a lawnmower. So they're cleaning up the grass and keeping it low. So this idea of sentience, that animals feel, animals engage purposefully with other animals, including humans. Animals feel pain. They don't just react to it. They internalize it and they feel. And so these theories of how people work with animals really led to some of the first work on animal rights. And animal rights, not just for dogs and cats, the typical companion animals, but for livestock and working animals as well. What sentience-centered theories and animal rights theories do is really try to create practices that reduce the pain and suffering that animals are experiencing, even if they are agreeing to work with us. And so if there's this idea of consent and animals choose to be with us, are we allowing them to be with us in a way that improves their quality of life, doesn't diminish from it? Out of the animal rights movement, Tom Reagan developed this idea of the 5 freedoms. And the 5 freedoms may sound fairly innocuous, fairly simple, but think about where the development of these had to come from. So the idea that animals should be free from thirst, hunger, malnutrition, because people saw animals that were hungry, that didn't have access to water, that weren't getting the food and minerals and supplements that they needed to be healthy. Freedom to express their normal behavior for their species. We looked at that 10,000-pound tray of hay with the 4-horse team. Those 4 horses might not have gotten along. They might not have chosen to interact together in that configuration of 4. So what is the normal behavior for that species? And how can we support them with their natural, typical behavior? Are they social? Does a group of 4 work well together? Or is this animal more solitary in nature? Let's find that out and let's give them the optimum environment. Freedom from fear and distress. When you know better, you do better. In the 1700s, in the 1800s, people might not have realized that they were training or leading or guiding animals from a period of fear and stress. And so different tools were incorporated into the training and the work that was done with these animals to encourage them, to prompt them to listen, to force them to listen. So do they have a life free of fear? Do they have a life that's free from pain, injury, and disease? As much as possible. Injuries happen, accidents happen, even with humans. And so, but can you create an environment where that is less likely and not anticipated, but it's outside of the norm? And a freedom from discomfort due to their environment. On the table, you can see a few different halters that are there. One is older, from the early 1900s, and one is from 2025. And these halters are structured to work on cattle with pressure on their snout. And so is that discomfort? We have to know the animal to determine if they are uncomfortable with that. Sometimes you'll see extra padding put on horse or cattle halters to help reduce the discomfort that might be applied from the pressure of that. So this is the idea of 5 freedoms, really trying to ensure that animals are choosing to participate with us, that they're in the optimum environment to participate with humans and with others of similar or varying species. So obviously you get a sense that I take an animal-centric view when I work with animals. I like to think that there are other ways to get work done, other ways that individuals can consent to the work, can agree to participate, to agree to partner with us. And this idea of virtue ethics. For example, this child who has his own cart, it looks like there's firewood there, there's a rake there. He's engaging in farm work. And maybe he's thinking, you know, the horse, the cow, the steer, the oxen, they've done enough for today. Let me pick up some of their slack. Let me see if I can do what they do. And so this idea of building up virtue, empathy, compassion, when we're thinking about developing ourselves and our relationship with animals. This is a gentleman who's harvesting potatoes. And these are 2 boys. And this picture You can read a lot into this. Could be two young boys with their pet dog and the dog's on the chair. Maybe they're all eye level. Maybe they're all at the same eye level, considering each other. Maybe they decided to put the dog on the chair because in their eyes, the dog is on a pedestal. Maybe they're looking at what their relationship with the dog is like. Maybe the dog just jumped up there and stole the chair before anyone could do it. What's really important here too is that this is a picture from the late 1800s. Film was not readily available. Someone thought this image of a dog with two young boys was important enough to take and to print out. So for me, that's pretty cool. That's showing a level of relationships and importance of relationships that we hope to see. I mentioned the idea of consent. How do we know if animals are agreeing to participate with us? How do we know that they're having fun? How do we know that they're enjoying the work that they're doing? This, unfortunately, is not a picture from the White Mountains. This is a picture from an Antarctic tour. And this particular sailor, the boat had a cat that lived on the boat. I chose to put this picture in very purposefully. There's no collar. There's no lead on this cat. There's no person's hand holding the cat in place. This cat has chosen to be where he is on this sailor's shoulder. I will say it's a working animal. The cat is a working animal. He kept mice away from the sailor's food and also the equipment and products being transported. But we don't always get this clear cut of an image of consent. And we don't always take a look from an animal perspective. What was this cat potentially experiencing? We can look at body language and determine some of the aspects of comfort of choosing to be there. I think the story looks very different when we look at images such as this from Twin Mountains in New Hampshire of a bear that has a fence, that has a chain, and he's sitting on a stump drinking a beer. What was he or she thinking, feeling when this picture was taken? All the days before and all the days after this picture was taken. This was a tourist spot, a recreation facility in the Twin Mountains. And not very creative, his name was Teddy, Teddy the bear. So as we conclude our time together tonight, I suppose I would like to ask you, the next time you're out driving roads in the White Mountains, the next time you're out hiking in the many, many miles of hiking trails that we have, the next time that you're engaging in any of our seasonal recreational activities, whether it's skiing, hiking, snowmobiling, driving an ATV, or maybe you're on a dog sled ride, I'd ask for you to think about not only the people that have worked so hard to build these areas for us, but also the animals who have worked not only to make this area so accessible for our needs, our purposes, our desires, but have also made it, as I would like to think, one of the most beautiful places in the world. I leave you with Walter and Hobbes. Thank you.
Interesting. Yeah. So some great comments in the chat. If there's questions in person or questions in the chat, feel free to put them here, or I think you can click on the Q&A and put them in there as well. Any questions here in person while folks type? Yeah.
You go to 2 different farms, like while you're doing your stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I went to many different farms. I also went to different sanctuaries. So sanctuaries are where animals will live out the rest of their life without having to work, and be taken care of by staff, mostly volunteers that are there too. We spent a lot of time going up to farms in the White Mountains, but also the fairs too during the fall. Yeah.
You mentioned the cats, to keep the mice away. I've been working as a volunteer in the observatory, and there's always a cat there, and for that reason.
At the White Mountain Observatory.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. And there are some amazing pictures of the whole legacy of cats that have served at the White Mountain Observatory year round. They are there year round. Yes.
And they get fed at 4. We are not allowed to feed them any other time.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think I saw Drew has a comment about the dolphins, and there's a more recent push for marine life sanctuaries. And a lot of that is coming out of European countries that are looking at trying to protect whales of various species in open water sanctuaries, which is kind of neat.
So we have a question in the chat. It says, in your research, did you encounter any records, written or photographic, of non-domestic animals being recruited for agricultural purposes?
Yes. I had to think about that for a bit. Up in this area, we saw a lot of moose that were being used or worked with to pull sleighs. So I wouldn't consider moose domesticated, although some people will say 1 or 2 have been. There also have been cases of bison or buffalo that have also been individual of the species have been domesticated to work with certain families. Outside of this region, we've found evidence of camels, and also ostriches being worked with to pull carriages, sleighs, and produce to market.
Thanks.
And elephants would be used too, right?
Elephants in different countries, absolutely. And based on which country we're looking at, there's different levels of domesticity. In Australia, camels are very widely populating the area to the point where there are culls for them because there are so many camels, but people do take the camels and work with them on farms in Australia. India, African countries do so with elephants to a lesser degree. There's more of a push for sentience with elephants than with other animals because of the ability to interpret their behaviors and sounds for grief and also for learning.
Thanks. And Drew, you put a question in the chat about unmuting. I think I've made it so you can, if you want to go ahead and.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I had a question. I call it sort of the farm ethics, and it sort of tends towards the utilitarianism as distinct from the PETA ethics. And I was wondering, to me, my grandparents were farmers. My dad had 23 horses, and I, am not at this stage. But you grow up with this ethics that you try to treat animals well in general, and you might go beyond the practicalness of, say, keeping an older favorite horse around for many years as much as you can. But ultimately, it gets to the point where something has to give. And the practicality of the farm ethics with some dignity is where I sort of sit on it. I wanted your comments on that situation.
Right. I think that's a great comment. If we're thinking about end of life, we're thinking about quality of life, we definitely want to approach the life of others with a sense of dignity, as you brought up. also with a bit of respect, right? We want to have that framework that we're working with these partners, that we're treating them as we would want to be treated ourselves. And so we would expect and hope to have a level of dignity and respect given to us when our quality of life declines to a point of no return or no assistance. And so I think that's a great point to bring up. And the farm ethics approach does take into account animal rights and also animal purpose, if you will.
Yeah, and part of it is the amount of suffering that the animal was having at any given point.
Absolutely.
And you as the human have somewhat better idea of how to make that less and know when enough's enough.
And I think, Drew, a big part of the farm ethics, the animal ethics, is being able to know each individual animal very intimately.
Well, it's hard to name them when you're going to have them for dinner.
Right, but you know their behaviors, and you know when they're hurting, and you know what is a good effort in soothing them, what's going to work because of that time. So I think it goes beyond the naming of them, but just the time and investment of emotion with them as well.
Gigi?
Yeah, and cockfights and steer fights have been outlawed in this country, right? Because of the cruelty.
Right, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And in all 50 states, domestic companion animals are protected and considered in cases of marital separation and divorces, but that doesn't extend over to livestock at this point. So there's different classifications of companion animals and animal rights based on species and breed in some places.
So where did dog sled dogs fit on that timeline?
I'm sorry?
Dog sled.
Where did dog sled dogs fit? They, you know, the owners will tell you they live to run and run to live.
Yes.
And it's all a very cooperative, personal kind of thing that goes on. Yet Peter would say, no, you've got them tied up in little cages, and oh my God.
Right. And I think there is a balance to be made there. And that's on a very interpersonal relationship that people have with that sport or that activity. And looking at those 5 freedoms, are the dogs choosing to do this? And you can see in many cases that the dogs appear to be actively engaged. They're doing what they like to do. And
yeah, sheepdog chase ball.
I didn't hear.
What's that? We didn't catch that.
A sheepdog chases ball. And the kid keeps throwing it, keeps throwing it, keeps throwing it, and they keep on doing it.
And some dogs
steps in and says she's had enough.
Some animals, whether it's dogs or cattle or horse, have that mentality bred into them over generations, and it would be considered a disservice not to allow them to engage in their natural behavior.